This is Dave Monk, Prairie Monk, but I want to announce early that I have a spare ticket to Ebert First. It's the last program, and it's about a guy in New Orleans, but it starts at 1 o'clock, so you would have to come to WEFT, and we're in the studio. You can poke your nose into the studio and get it if you would like, or give us a call. Even if you get it a little late after our program, which finishes at noon. The program starts at noon, but there's a talk beforehand, so you could still get there. So
I can actually fill in a little bit of information. I know what the program is. I've been plugging it, and I don't even need that. It's a documentary about a gentleman who lived and died in New Orleans. His name was James Booker. He was called the Bayou Maharaja. Quite a character, very, very distinctive human being. Yeah, very musical. He had the sort of mind that I am amazed that there are studio recordings where he actually went through and played an entire song all the way through. There's a live recording of him called something like The Return of the Bayou Maharaja, where he's just sitting at one of the clubs in New Orleans playing, and he never finishes the song. He gets most of the way through, and he says, "That reminds me," and he's off in a completely different direction. So he'll be playing some New Orleans classic, and then suddenly he's playing something by some classical music and whatever. So there's a documentary about the Bayou Maharaja, and Henry Butler, probably the reigning New Orleans pianist these days, is both interviewed as part of the the movie, and he'll also be at Ebert Fest to talk a little bit about James Booker. So that's what you're in for if you come and get this ticket this afternoon. If I wasn't already solidly booked up as soon as we're finished here, I would be happy to take that and go to see this documentary.
Okay. So now you can go over there.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, and Dave on the board. Oh, and I'm also we were talking about trains just a little bit beforehand. Dave talks about
I was just announcing the ticket.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you put the theme music on?
We already played the theme music.
Oh, okay.
We played the whole thing, actually, yes.
Okay. Well, this is Dave Monk, Prairie Monk, WEFT, Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave will get on the board.
And let me get my script here. Okay. Yeah, Dave's been to Minnesota by train, so tell us a little bit about that. And trains are very valuable because they do mileage at lower rate of using energy.
I've actually got a book about bicycles that say bicycling is about the most efficient way to get around. Cars can become efficient if you put people in every seat. Like 4 people in a car may be almost as energy efficient as a single person on a bicycle. But yes, the book actually says, trains blow everything away if you fill up most of the seats. And the Amtrak trains average 300 people to the train. And that, considering some of those trains are the Illini and the Saluki that don't go very far, there must be some of them that, like the one that I was on, the Empire Builder, going up from Chicago, passing through Minnesota on its way to the West Coast. There must have been easily 500, 600 people that they were putting on those on that train. And I love traveling by train. It's not time efficient for me to get from Champaign to St. Cloud, Minnesota. It's about a 13-hour trip all told, including a several-hour layover once you hit Chicago. And it was a 16-hour trip going up this time because the train was delayed. The empty train was delayed getting to the station, which meant sitting on sidings several times because we weren't where we were supposed to be to easily let freight trains go by. Amtrak doesn't actually have priority on all of these lines. We always have to pull over to let the freight trains go by so that they get to stay on schedule and we don't. But it does mean that you get to get up, you get to walk around, you can stroll all over the place on the train, which you can't do on the very speedy, more expensive, and very cramped airplane. I read an entire novel on the way back, so what's something you can do is when you got that extra time on your hands, you can put it to good use.
Also look out the window and note the environment.
On the way up, we got through like La Crosse and that area in Wisconsin, at sundown, and the fog started to roll in because it was very, very humid. They'd been getting quite a bit of rain, and there were deer everywhere. All the empty fields had like little flocks of deer wandering around and prancing all over the place. And then on the way back, it was earlier in the day, and there were raptors everywhere, bald eagles, and every time you'd go past a stand of trees along the river, there would be several bald eagles scattered around, or else just flying out there over. I didn't quite get to see one of them make a dive into the water. It was just kind of hovering over the lake from a couple of feet above it, and it was it looked as though it was watching for some fish, some dumb fish, to come too close to the surface, and it would pounce on it. So yes, that's great. When you're in a plane, you can kind of see these teeny tiny little plots of land way down on the ground. But yes, by train, it's a lot more fun.
Yeah.
We'll tell people about the views and opinions at the end of the show, but yes, that was definitely an opinion.
Yes, I appreciate that. We keep watching the trains and watching some of the development around railroad lines. There's some development in the Curtis Road area at the moment. It's mainly to do with electricity. I checked it out because I thought it might be the overall aim in the long run is to put an underpass under Curtis Road, under the railroad line, lift the railroad up 7 feet and put it east by 25 feet and make an underpass. So I thought that might have been happening. But that's not likely to be happening just yet. First of all, I'd like to go to, in passing, Vera Vogel passed, and Vera Vogel was a powerhouse in her own right. She was from St. Louis in the first place, married Ray Vogel. Ray Vogel was an X-ray technician in the sense of taking mass spectrophotometers and assessing the pieces of rock or organic material, or trying to figure out what the X-ray structure was of materials, crystallography. So Ray came and worked with the University of Illinois. Vera was a secretary in her own right. She sort of contracted out to people. I knew her for a long time. She was very supportive of things like the Oakley Reservoir, which would have taken Allerton Park out of action to a large extent. She also provided financial support to a lot of organizations like the Sierra Club or Isaac Walton League or Audubon. All had people who had worked with Vera. She had when I first knew her, I think I remember her having a house with a bird, and I forget what the bird was, but it would fly around the house. Then they had a nice house in the woods in northwest Urbana, and she loved the nature that was there, and the house was built so that it didn't destroy the forestry of the situation. Every once in a while, she had to get someone to cut a tree limb off the roof, but otherwise it was a safe and interesting place to be, along with a number of friends who had some of the same interests in that area. She was a person that put money into things which in the long run bear fruit. She supported Heartland Pathways in the early stages when we were needing to assess whether we could do an interim trail use agreement in the Urbana to Danville area. And eventually that corridor will probably lead to somewhere between 10 and 11, $12 million project. And so that investment is tremendously important. So we thank her for that. She was also donated things. So did Ray. Ray had lots of X-ray equipment, little bottles where you could put a solution in it before you did X-ray or spectrophotometry or X-ray on it. They gave us a blue station wagon. It was getting older. It was leaking a little bit, but it was very instrumental in us doing early work before it eventually broke down too far. But it helped us to try and save the Pepsin factory in Monticello. It helped us to do early work with trails through Heartland Pathways. It was interesting. We exchanged this vehicle in Crystal Lake Park, and Vera was fondly polishing down the vehicle for the last time because it had been more or less a family heirloom. And Ray was beside it, and so his comment was, "Hausfrau." There was some Germanic comment there, sort of indicating that Vera was neat and tidy. And at the funeral yesterday, people were saying things about if they had hair too long, Vera would not be backward in saying that they ought to neaten up. So we say goodbye to Vera and her nieces and nephews that were there, and appreciate her involvement over the years. And so a lot of other people feel the same. Now I want to change the topic a little bit to Ebert Fest. Each year I find that this festival can change your life some. You see pictures. I don't usually go to a lot of pictures because running a non-profit agency is almost a 24-hour-a-day job. So you don't relish the thought of having to sit in a theatre for an hour and a half to watch a film. It's important to do, I know, but it just is that we haven't reached that degree of a relaxation where we can take time off to go to Europe or do some of these things that are very educational in value. So when a film festival comes to town like Ebert Fest, it is rather tremendous. You get to see a range of pictures. You get to hear about the life of a film critic who was really well known. There's a lot of local involvement, so the constant comment from the people who were leaders in the talk shows before and after was that the experience of being in a theatre with a huge display, whether it is digital or whether it is 35 millimeter with quality projection, is really quite tremendous. And the quiets are quieter. The explosion of sympathy and interest and excitement is louder and more tangible. And so the experience of going to the Virginia Theatre and just being there as a friend and relative, you meet people, and one of the things that I get out of this festival and other festivals too, other previous festivals, is that it is very important to have people together as community. It's very hard to do. How do you even get a film? How do you get the people to be in a film in the first place? Let alone how do you get together an audience to see it? But the audience comes, and the specialists come, Spike Lee or Oliver Stone or various people, and they feel the response from the audience allows them to be fairly outspoken in their commentary. So I have a suspicion that some of the comments I was hearing would not be expressed quite so strongly elsewhere. there's that interaction. And you have to find a seat, and can you keep a seat? Well, I had the temerity to put a sweater across 2 seats at night, but you're not allowed to do that. The popcorn and whatnot is vacuumed up during the night, so you can keep a seat for the day, but you have to claim it each morning when you go. So there's some rules like that. There was a memorial to Roger, and that was informative, and it was open. They were very willing to tell Roger's story, and Roger and Jazz, his wife, were quite willing to do that, and anxious to have people to record information that might be otherwise not available if they hadn't said, we want you to do this. So you see Roger going through a period of cancer starting in 2001 and finishing with his demise. That is helpful if you can follow through some of the lives of people like Jim Sternberg last week. It gives people the confidence that they can do things, and even if you don't think you're a world beater, you can contribute, and you have to do it through agencies like the Virginia Theatre. There's a new one which is quite a part of the same philosophy, is the Art Theatre, is there asking for people to become owners in a co-op that now owns the Art Theatre. And the Art Theatre projects digitally now. There wasn't enough room to be able to retain their 35 millimeter or 16 millimeter projection, so they're digital, and there's a question as to whether they should have an entry to the film, discussion beforehand, and a discussion afterwards. Well, there's some economics in this. If you do that, it's going to take half an hour, and that stops you from projecting the film again for another audience. So they've done that sometimes, and I suspect they'll do it in the future, because it's very positive to have somebody who has put the film together, or has been an actor, or a technician associated with the film, to be there, and perhaps you only get 5, 6, 25 people together before or after to discuss the film, because there are often so many different thoughts about the film. People interpret in their own way, and you would be quite amazed that from the audience will come a question which makes the director of the film realize that he's never been asked that question before, never interpreted that scene in that way. So we have a community that has film, and we have people who are well read in film. They can look at the light and the shadows and the expertise of the camera. We have an increasing number of people who have never been to film school, yet they're directors, because they're using digital technology that allows them to work in a cheaper manner. There are also older films, like the one last night was a Oliver Stone film that was 25 years old. And you have to think about whether this is politics. It was about Vietnam. In its day, it was very controversial, and maybe still controversial and dealing with issues. There are films that are silent films, so you have the people who come and bang on various pieces of equipment and use computerized music to accompany it, a silent movie. There is often a gestalt. You have films like The Museum, where Cohen took people to Europe and looked at museums, and the poetry of the picture is wonderful. I caught up with the director and asked why there was like a very heavy yellow bold Futura underpinning titles. And he said, it's unfortunate, but this film is being watched on cell phones. It's being watched on digital equipment that's very small. And in order to get something that they can read, we have to have bold Futura and bold color. He said, when we have other audiences, he takes the language which needs to be underlined and puts it in, dubs it as Americans aren't awfully excited by undertitles. They don't like to read them, and I can agree. At the time I've looked at the undertitle, and then I start to look at the picture that it's related to, the darn thing is gone. And sometimes American audiences are expected to read things very quickly, and not everyone reads quickly. So if you start the film clip about the same time as you start the undertitle, and you get to the end of it quickly, then you're lost. So sometimes overseas films are slower, and films that are done overseas and even locally, that happens too. And there's more of a tendency to take in information from a lot of different directions. The museum film that I'm talking about, where a lot of gallery pictures were involved, and streetscapes and pigeons and Lord knows what all. It was a mixture, as if you went out on one of my field trips and we looked at something as we went. And it doesn't come together as a nice linear event. It comes together as something overall. And that's pretty tremendous. I have something like 80,000 slides up there that are like this. So I'm looking at that museum film. I will never be going to Europe, and never have been to Europe, because what I do is not financial enough to do that sort of thing, and the time frame is not there. If I have a chance, I go back to Australia. But the taking you to a site that you could never go to, an Antarctic glacier or a bird that you'll never see. Somebody's been having to sit around for months to get a photograph of this bird, and it comes to you on film. So film is tremendously important from an educational point of view. So we need those media college things that Ebert has been supporting. Creative critique, education about films, and the ability to actually make films. University of Illinois hasn't had a very big practical film studio that creates films, so it's up to people to do their own things. So you do have people like the climatology people who discover that a tornado has young tornadoes just because you have artists and film people together. So there's more of a team approach. And there is also a mental approach. There was one film with Brie Larson in it, a fairly young person. It was oriented to social work, and it sort of stressed the importance of knowing yourself in order to know somebody else. So they were working with teenage people who had problems, and then if the people themselves understand themselves, then they can actually go to a person who is fairly private and doesn't want to expose their tradition and find out what it is and help to survive it. And I thought that was good, and I thought that theme was there in people from China and people from Iran that were looking at their streetscapes, telling us about their environment. And I find that very useful to go into the field and find someone who is quite irate about your vegetation shading the soybeans that are in the next field. And then you get to talk about agriculture, and you talk about your background, and gradually that person will drag out of his glove box a copy of the local little cemetery and take you there to show you where his ancestors came from. And that sort of thing is what I'm talking about. So rather exciting to see this sort of thing. It's a lot of film at one time, and that takes you out of circulation, and that can give you collywobbles in the stomach because you know that you have so many other things to do. There's an economics here. We've almost changed from celluloid film to digital and left the film behind. And so I was talking, one guy from the Philippines said, we have all this wonderful film from years ago that was black and white because it was cheaper, perhaps. But what do we do with this? Is that going to die? Well, yes, perhaps. But the people who handle film distribution and the like are saying that if the Library of Congress is to take one digitalized film to film, it's going to take thousands and thousands of dollars to do that. But if you want to see it in 100 years' time, it's so much cheaper to do that than to take your digital film, which will be out of date in 5 years, and convert it to another form of technology to keep some of that old equipment so that you can read it, and it breaks down, and so the economics of saving a major film is realized at the moment. So major films are being taken from the digital style back to film because it is cheap to store a film at a lower temperature, and it's not very expensive to do that storing. And so we talk about the economics. But if you're talking about economics, you have to know that we have the 1% that needs to get the money for doing things. So you have this middle stream which is going to make money, whether it's with media or handheld items. There's a drive to get that mainstream, and that's where the money is. The things that are often very interesting are to the side. Sometimes they make no money because they're critical of some issue or controversial, but on the other side they're soft and gentle, and you know that they're never going to make money on the mainstream. But the thought is that if you're going to keep those low-income films together, you need to have a public that is prepared to become educated in film. And I know they're educated because I cannot read undertitles as fast as some people do. So if you're talking to the educated public, then you can do it fast. But you also have to think about the masses that are out there that are reading this stuff on computers, and it goes so fast that they don't pick that up. So what we were after is a more generally educated public that knows more about film. I mean, you wouldn't be reading novels if you didn't have some knowledge of English. You have to have the counterpart of video or film or even still photography sometimes. You have to be educated a little bit. It's like food. The food that you may not like in the first place, you've gone to a new country and there's something that they revere and you think is absolute. There's one that I encounter which is Marmite. Marmite is a salty but rather healthy material that comes from the digestion of the embryos of the beer industry that aren't used in the brewing process, but they're part of it to start with. Well, that makes a Marmite or a Vegemite, which here is too salty because in the U.S., sugar was used to preserve things rather than salt. In a place like Australia, the salt was used to preserve meat and the like that had to be taken by ship to England or Europe. So food is an acquired taste. So sometimes film is an acquired taste too. You need studios where you can see this sort of material. It's good to have a digital handheld item that you can use. The criticism is that people will stop it in midstream and go to the toilet or what have you. But then doing that, they're not forced to watch the whole film, and they lose the contiguity of that film. So getting them into a theater like the Virginia is friendly. And they get to meet each other. I don't know how many people I've met in just this week. There's even little things about finding your seat, waving to each other, or I had to put my hand on a bicycle stand, and I found another hand came on top of the stand, and it was squeezing my hand as if I was the husband or whatever. And just that is very friendly. I didn't move or do anything. The hand eventually disappeared, but there's a little closeness there that makes the studio rather a wonderful place. To have foreign people involved, to have the woman from Iran dealing with the child that has to grow up in a country where women don't get to do things. The child wanted to ride a bicycle, to buy a bicycle, and in order to do that, this was totally illegal for a woman to do, and so she was challenging the system. So you can't be outlandishly positive about making this statement, so I have to do it indirectly, and the statement is still there. So that's a whole nother thing. How much politics do you put into your film? It's almost the Vietnam era with Oliver Stone. The man himself is a politician, and he may not be on one side or the other, but he certainly is making political statements. There are films that make you think. You don't necessarily have a tidy ending. What happened to this guy when he passed on or went to the next step? We don't tell you that. That's for you to put into your imagination, and that can be wonderful too. there's also a difference in countries. The Filipino guy was wondering what was going to happen to all the films, also had been in Australia, and he noticed that Australian film system is slightly different. In Australia, you have initial settlement with convicts. You have a country that doesn't have good soils. There's lots of desert. The only arable part is around the coastal areas. You have an administration that comes down in a colonial form with an administration at the top coming down. And you have a group of people that are mainly British Isles. They're English or Irish. You don't have the tremendous the diversity that you have in the U.S. So you're seeing public involvement in infrastructure like railroads and sometimes banks, and infrastructure like broadcasting. So he was aware of that and suggesting that some forms of that are more important here. Who promotes your film? And you have to sometimes climb up the ladder and get to have influential artists in order to make a large film. But more and more, many of these directors are not going to film school. They're starting off with an idea, and the idea takes off, and they go to another step and another step, and eventually it all of a sudden blossoms because there are little pieces, little groups like film festivals like Cannes and Sundown and Ebert Fest and the like. Let me just look at my notes. Oh, there's also a storytelling element. You need the storytellers. You need them to be able to, in some cases, be very linear. The Vietnam era thing was quite linear, but sometimes it's very loose and wanting you to decide what the outcome is. And I went to a very interesting workshop. Fortunately, most of the Ebert Fest is not in competition with itself. If you go to meetings, even the North American Prairie conferences like this, you have several meetings running at once. So sometimes you would like to be at all three meetings at the same time. So you run into one and run into another, or you miss things. If you cannot overlap, on Saturday there was an overlap, so I couldn't go to the political seminar. I went to the applied one, which is how to film low-budget films. And the gentleman that was doing that was very good at explaining that you probably don't need to spend more than $250 on the camera. You can probably do it with your cell phone, because the cell phone technology, the optics has gotten so good that the quality is up there. You don't no longer have the problem of not being able to make more than an 8x10 print because it will be so grainy. Now you can put that print up on a 16 or 20 foot film stage and it will work. So a cheaper camera is okay. Know its capacity. It has a menu, so you know it has a film speed. It has a film ISO. It's called, I think. It tells you, like in the past, you used to have a film speed. Say you were very slow. You were working with Kodak, and you wanted something very accurate. You had a film speed of say 10 or 12. If you wanted to do something at night and fast with, say, athletics, you had to have 400 ASA. Well, the digital cameras have that same sort of thing. So you can go into the menu and change the ISO some. And you have an aperture. So you can make the film you can get a long distance in photograph if you've got a very, very narrow aperture. If you have a broad aperture, then you're going to see it differently, and so your person in front of you is going to be in photograph, but the landscape behind is not going to be in photograph. You also have the capacity to do lighting. So the suggestion was, with all these little cameras, if you hand hold them, they almost replicate your beat of your heart. You cannot keep them still. So they have frames that you put this camera on, and the frame is heavier so that your muscles don't move them in the same manner. So just a little expenditure to get a frame is very good. To carry a ladder is good. To get up, to give some variety. Long shot, medium shot, short shot, but also up and down. And so there are now cranes that you can wheel around and project your camera. The camera is way out on the end of the crane, and you can almost put it under somebody's nose without it being noticed. But you can do the same with a skateboard. Take a skateboard and put your camera on the skateboard and roll it along. If you want it higher, put a chair on the skateboard, or have a frame that's a little larger. Use monopods if you have to. Take care of the day that you're filming. If you want sound, then you're going to have to be careful to be on a day when there's not a huge wind that's going to aberrate your sound. Watch your lighting. Have adjunct lighting, fairly cheap, $20, $30, $40, and light the person on one side, and that affects the color balance. So if you're inside and you have a tungsten light, it might be a little yellow. And if you have a window nearby, it will be more natural light, and it will be almost blue. So how do you balance those things? And you can do it fairly cheaply. The main one they seem to be worried about most is the shake. Then there are contracts. And you may have a very simple problem. It's like we have with natural areas. If we're going to make an easement with a city like Monticello and keep the natural area on either side, then there needs to be a contractual agreement so that before the fact you know what's there. If you happen to do a film that all of a sudden takes off, it may be that if you don't have a contract, you don't make any money out of that because some other agency takes the rights because they have a little bit of interest in it. So on the other hand, if you're about to be sued, you need some protection there. And so you need a contract, and that almost needs a group of people who will help you to sort things out. So there's a film agency that does that, and it's called SAG, the Screen Actors Guild. And even if you're volunteering your friends and relatives, you may want to give them a contract. So somebody was dealing with that, and I thought that was very, very helpful. So enough of the Film Fest. It was running at the same time as the marathon. So I was talking to Kim Robeson, and her brother was running at the half marathon. And the family didn't really know that he was doing this, but it was there, and if you were trying to get to the Film Fest, you had a problem getting around town. I went to MTD, and I wanted to go to the Union where the seminars are, and the buses couldn't get past. So the organising bus was unable to do what it was supposed to do, so they were headed for the Union, so they just popped me in, and I got a ride right to the Union. And then on the way back, I find that the Eberfest has volunteers who take a visiting person and care for them. So they bring them back and forth from the Union Motel to the event. So when I came out of the seminar on low-income photography, there was a gentleman from Indiana. We had been chatting away, and I realized that he had one of these cars to pick him up. So I said, "Can I bum a ride?" And yes, I got a free ride to the studio. So those things in the background, there's a tremendous amount of organization, which we have to thank the Park District for, and people like the News Gazette and others that have promoted this thing. I think that's enough about the Ebert Fest. I have a few other things here that I wanted to say something about. Every once in a while there's a visitor comes to WEFT, and I happen to be around, and so there was a guy named Murray Propes who was here probably 20 years ago, and WEFT is 33 now, and he was not only looking for WEFT, but he was looking for Mike and Molly's, because apparently Mike and Molly's or somebody promoted a picture of Roster, who used to be a member of WEFT and also very much a part of Mike and Molly's. But Mike and Molly's wasn't open, but I was able to bring him in and show him my Roster's picture in the back studio. And so that was interesting. We had a little event with oil in the garbage. We have a big patch of leaky oil out in front of the next door building, and that was because oil was put into the garbage can. Oil invariably leaks, especially if it's in plastic and you dump it on something else where it makes a hole in the plastic. And it's totally illegal to do that. So just remind you that if you have something to do with excess oil, please don't put it in the garbage can. I met up with Jessica Watson, who often writes for Smile Politely, and did an article on us not too long ago. And I received a nice document from Chris Carl. It's about Heartland Pathways and its nature trail, and working with Ameren and the Wright Tree Service. So we've been visiting with these people, and they need maps to know where they cannot spray and cannot mow, but where they can mow to our mutual advantage. So Chris has put together this 17 by 10 inch proposal, which is about 20 pages long, and it gives the exact numbers to the towers. If you look at the towers, they have a number way up high that you can see. If you can't see it, you can get a pair of binoculars and see it. So we have to be thankful we have those sorts of people. And this is a little bit like the film festival. We need people to do these sorts of jobs, and Chris has been doing that very well, and we hope to have others that might work on that sort of thing. We've continued to work with Allerton Park and Armenia, and likewise we have a 5-page document that has gone to the director of Allerton Park and to Packer and others. Packer is often involved with the salvage from university buildings. we're begging for an awareness of the history of Sam Allerton, who was the father of Robert Allerton, who donated the park to the university. And that also involves us with mapping of the corridor that's right outside Armenia. And once that happens, then there are other people who are prepared to look at an entrance to our rail bed corridors, to announce them, to give them some credit, to allow us to have no-mow policies adjacent to the road, to work with the Department of Transportation, to work with the Department of Natural Resources, and that's rather wonderful. Speaking of the Natural Resources Department, we have had more announcements in the newspaper of additional trails. And not only has the Kickapoo Trail from Urbana to Danville received quite a bit of money from the federal government, coming through to the state government, coming through to the Department of Natural Resources, and also to the governor's office. So there is money available for the development of the rail bed between High Cross Road and Sun Cho. How do we do that? How do you get public involvement? So that public involvement means that the public eventually owns that land and protects it. So we talked to the Forest Preserve and others about what is the plan. The road is 150, which is adjacent to the railroad bed, is going to be developed at the same time. So we want to watch that and see that it is not planted to invasive species. So I'm talking to Jack White and others. Heartland Pathways had 3 reasons for acquiring this land in the first place. It was for rails, if needed, trails, if needed, and to preserve the habitat. So those 3 issues we're still interested in, and I would like to see a documentation of the modest amount of prairie that remains along those lines on original soil. The additional money that came recently is in the Monticello area. Not Monticello, sorry, Mahomet area. And it increases the length of trails there. And also in the Rantoul area where the Fisher Grain and Coal Company closed out a line from Dillsburg, which is at top of the Bloomington Moraine, down to Rantoul and through urban area. They gave 3 miles of the urban area to the community, and about $2 million has been spent on a very nice trail, which is already being used extensively. And I was hoping that the money might go to going up the hill to the Dillsburg, but that didn't happen. That land has gone back to farming, which is fairly typical. But if the trails become popular enough, you may be able to negotiate to continue the trail up the hill. So we're pleased about those 2 things. Now, we're going to have some changes in, I've still got a little, 3 minutes. Okay, well, the Mervis Marco salvage yard is closing on April 30th. You no longer can pick up your cans and trundle them across to Marco's or Mervis's. That function is gone to Cunningham Avenue. I'm a little sorry to see it move out of town because there is a lot of salvage work that goes on by wee folk, little folk, that won't go on if you take it up to Cunningham Avenue. So I did take some plastic over there. It was plastic from the inside of mattresses, and it was pure polyester plastic. and I took it purposely to find out what were the limits of what the plastic salvage would be at the new facility. And sure enough, it's limited to bottles and cans and food containers and soft plastic, no hard plastic, no fibers that don't conform to that sort of plastic. So I had to bring that home, and I'll have to put that in a recycling to the garbage can, so that plastic will go to Clinton or to Danville and stay there for many, many years. And I'm sad about that, but we need badly to have a plastic unit in town that boils down or heats down the plastic and reuses it. We don't have that. It's expensive. Probably you could spend $60,000 without any bother at all to get the equipment to make that possible. In the meantime, we have to send hard plastic and special plastic to the landfill. But if you have cans and you need to trundle them in, do it fairly soon, because that facility nearby, all the bulk salvage has already been removed, and gravel has been put down where the collection area was. So it's definitely on the out. I find the same problem at Monticello. They put the new library out of town. You really have to get a car to go to. And Urbana, Walmart is out on the edge. Aldi's is out on the edge. So you have to get in your car and go to those places. If you're lucky, you ride a bicycle. But as yet, riding a bicycle to those places is not very safe. Well, I think we're near the end, so this is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.